U.S. President Donald Trump is getting ready to head back to Washington at any moment following a NATO summit in The Hague that was meant to be focused on European defense. But it is the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran and the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities that dominated much of the conversation. Earlier, the NATO chief referred to Trump as, quote, "Daddy," and praised him for helping to resolve the Middle East crisis. And at the summit, Trump doubled down once again, claiming that U.S. strikes on Iran caused, quote, "total obliteration."
I dealt with both, and they're both tired, exhausted. They fought very, very hard and very viciously, very violently, and they were both satisfied to go home and get out. And can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon. They have fought a hell of a war. They fought very hard. I think the war ended actually when we hit the various nuclear sites with the planes. No, I think they're very much finished. I think Israel's going to get back to doing what they do, and I think that Iran's going to get back. You know, Iran has a huge advantage. They have great oil, and they can do things. I don't see them getting back involved in the nuclear business anymore. I think they've had it. They've been at it for 20 years, and I don't see that happening either. Now, if it does, we're always there. It won't be me, it'll be somebody else, but we're there. We'll have to do something about it.
NATO leaders agreed on a massive increase in defense spending, and they also expressed their ironclad commitment to each other to come to each other's aid if attacked. Now it comes after Trump initially questioned Article 5, the alliance's core principle of collective defense. CNN's Elena Treen joins me now live from Washington, D.C. And Elena, some 12 hours later, still continued pushback from this administration on the reports from the DIA assessment, the Defense Intelligence Agency's assessment early on of low confidence that the initial attacks from their assessment set Iran's nuclear program back by just a few months. The president really taking issue with that, inciting other intelligence agencies, notably Israel's Nuclear Intelligence Agency, saying that no, in fact, this was set back significantly many years. Also notable to hear the president say that the U.S. will be speaking with Iran next week. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, let's start with that, Bianna, because it is notable, and I've been hearing this in my conversations with people at the White House as well, that despite the U.S. strikes on those Iranian nuclear facilities, they do still want to work out some sort of negotiation, some sort of diplomatic deal. We heard the president say that a couple things. Well, one, he said that any of those talks, he said they're going to be meeting next week, but those talks would be focused on the same commitments that they were looking for prior to the war really breaking out and the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. He said they would be looking for the same type of commitments that the United States was looking for before, of course, in those conversations and negotiations that were led by the president's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. But he also said, and I found this very notable, he said that he doesn't believe it's actually that necessary. He said that multiple times. He said, you know, as he was coming up to the stage, he referenced his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio. He said, I asked Rubio as we were coming up here, do you want to do that? Can you draw up an agreement? And he said, again, I don't think it's necessary because, as he continues to claim, really disputing some of the initial intelligence reports we reported on, he continues to say that their nuclear sites are obliterated, so he doesn't believe it's necessary. But I can say I do know, again, in my conversations with people at the White House, in the Trump administration more broadly, they do, of course, still want to work out some sort of a deal, similar to what they were negotiating before, to make sure that, you know, there's a diplomatic solution to making sure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon, because despite the attacks we saw, and again, we are still trying to get really the assessment of what the actual damage was on the ground, they do still want to make sure that there is a diplomatic pathway and an agreement to ensuring that they don't rebuild, or that if they were able to salvage some of those nuclear materials, that those, such an agreement would prevent them from trying and, ultimately potentially being able to make a nuclear weapon. But some other things that were notable during that, I do want to bring up what you said, because our own CNN's Caitlin Collins asked the president about, do you not trust the United States assessment? He said, that he had been looking at both Israeli intelligence, but also Iranian. He said, that the document that he was referencing that statement from Iran before pointing to the assessment from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. He said that the document said it could be very severe damage, but they didn't take that. They said it could be limited or it could be very severe. I mean, that was the rhetoric we continued to hear from the president in discussing this. He did acknowledge, though, the CNN reporting that the initial, intelligence assessment from an agency beneath the Pentagon had, acknowledged that perhaps the damage wasn't as severe as the president was saying, that perhaps it wasn't actually, these sites weren't obliterated. So this is going to continue to be a thing that I know we will continue to kind of watch the president be defensive about. And also something I know that people on Capitol Hill, as the president is, or his team has been delaying some of these intelligence briefings for House and Senate members. It's something that they're looking for too. We've now heard from many lawmakers saying they want to get a fuller picture of what this administration knows, of what the intelligence community is gathering in light of those U.S. strikes on these Iranian nuclear facilities. So all of that kind of playing in the background as the president makes these remarks, Bianna.
Yeah, and a reminder, the president in the hours after these strikes came out and said that Iran's nuclear facilities had been obliterated. I think it's that obliterated term that people are following up on right now. It's also worth noting that the DIA assessment is just one of several, more than a dozen intelligence agencies that gather and study the fallout from strikes like this. So more information will be coming in the days to come for sure. But it did stand out that the president was citing Israeli intelligence, and we'll get to that with our guest in just a moment. Elena Train, thank you so much. Well, an Iranian foreign ministry spokesman says the country's nuclear installations were badly damaged in U.S. and Israeli attacks. Meanwhile, neither the U.S. nor Israel has produced a final assessment, but Israel's Atomic Energy Commission says the U.S. strikes on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. Earlier, a spokesman for the IDF said U.S. and Israeli strikes have set Tehran's nuclear program back by years. But he also acknowledged that it's still too early to know for sure. CNN's Nick Robertson joins me now live from Tel Aviv. And in terms of what we heard from the IDF spokesperson, Nick, Axios also reporting that Israeli sources were a bit surprised that the DIA assessment came in as quickly as it did, because even the IDF is saying that they need more time to further assess the damage from these strikes. What else are they saying?
Yeah, and we're also hearing the same thing from the finance minister here, Bezalel Smotrich, obviously a key ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, has said the same thing. Everyone here, whether it's the Atomic Energy Commission or the finance minister or the IDF spokesperson, that this is putting back Iran by years. But there also seems to be an agreement that Israel needs to examine the evidence and before it can really draw deep conclusions. And I think we got a sense of that from one of the lawmakers in the Knesset earlier today when he spoke about the fact that Israel has not yet had visibility on these sites, specifically meaning Fordow. And I think that gives you the understanding there that while Israel may have these assets in country and may normally be engaged in, close-up on-site analysis of the situation, the sense being created by politicians here is that hasn't happened yet with the specificity and detail that they need to make their assessment. And I think it's worth pondering on the fact that even going into this weekend, before the United States hit Fordow and other facilities, that what we were hearing from the Prime Minister was that Iran's nuclear program had been set back by years. So that was a narrative already. And I think if you examine, we shouldn't overpass what we're hearing from Israel's Atomic Energy Commission, but they're saying that it was the damage to critical infrastructure that rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. And if we think about what happened at Isfahan, that site there, the Israeli Air Force was able to hit the electricity substation, the local one, the specific one for that site, and the larger external power system linking that nuclear facility to the national power grid, and by therefore cutting off all options on electricity, it had rendered it inoperable. Isfahan, we also understand there was other damage as well. But in the language that the Energy Commission is using here, there's the scope for it to be potentially talking about a similar scenario. We don't know, and it does seem clear from an Israeli perspective, despite this several years setback they're describing, they're also saying that they haven't really closed eyes on to make that hard assessment yet, and that's where their position seems to lie.
Nick Robertson, thank you so much.